I call Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise to speak on the issue of MPs' pay with some trepidation. I think it'd be fair to say there's not a single vote to be gained in this particular debate. I don't think anybody particularly enjoys these kind of debates in Parliament. It'd be fair to say, as the Chief Whip of the Labour Party, I did not have a queue of MPs lining up outside my office door this morning wanting to speak on this particular piece of legislation, and I do so myself with some trepidation, Mr Speaker. I want to say right from the very outset that I absolutely agree with the principle behind this legislation, which is that MPs' pay should not be out of step with what every other New Zealander is getting at the moment. And I think that it is an issue that has been spoken about for some time, and it is absolutely high time that the Parliament addressed that, and so I'm pleased that this opportunity has arisen. However, I do have some significant concerns about whether the bill is going to actually deliver on that commitment. Now, I want to make it very clear from the outset that the Labour Party will be voting in favour of this legislation, and we will be voting in favour of it with all of the reservations that I'm about to go through, because voting against it would effectively be voting for the large pay rises that we are trying through this bill to effectively decline. So we are going to vote in favour of this legislation, but I want to make it clear that we have reservations. And we have particular reservations about pushing this bill through all stages under urgency without any kind of proper process around it. The risk of getting it wrong is high in doing that. The risk that we will need to come back and fix it again is high, but also the independence of the Remuneration Authority is compromised in the way this bill has been introduced and the way it is being pushed through. Interestingly, that by pushing this bill through under urgency all stages in the way we are today, the Remuneration Authority, who issued the original determination that gave the MPs the pay rises, will not get the chance to have any contribution on this debate at all. So the Remuneration Authority won't have the opportunity to come up to the Parliament and say, okay, if that's what you're trying to achieve, this bill won't do it. They won't have that opportunity. So we have no external verification that this bill is actually doing what we want it to do, which is that we want it to ensure that our own pay doesn't get out of step with the rest of the country. We have no guarantee of that. So while we're supporting it because we want to deal with the immediate issue, the long-term issue may well still remain. And there have been numbers flying everywhere from different parties, different bloggers, all of whom come up with a different set of calculations that may or may not demonstrate that over the longer term this bill could give us a lower pay rise or a greater pay rise. There are numbers flying around about various proposals to amend the bill that may or may not give us a lower or a higher pay rise. That's one of the problems with pushing a bill through all stages under urgency in the way this bill is being pushed through today. We absolutely support the principle of the bill, but we're not convinced that it is going to be actually delivered on by the words that we have in front of us at the moment. We've had 5 years to deal with this. The government have known since November that these pay rises were in the pipeline and likely to come up. Why has it taken until now, until the pay rises have already been awarded and are due to be paid into MPs' bank accounts next week, before finally we get legislation to deal with it? This should have been dealt with months, if not years ago, and then it could have been dealt with in a proper, considered process where it wouldn't be rushed through Parliament. I want to make it very clear, I'm also quite uncomfortable at the idea that the Cabinet, the Executive Cabinet, sets the policies around MPs' pay. That is why we have an independent body. And the idea that Cabinet can overturn the decisions of the Remuneration Authority when it disagrees with them is bad. It is worrying from a constitutional perspective. Now, I think it's right that the Parliament take another look at the criteria the Remuneration Authority use, but we have to accept that if we want these decisions to be made independently, then that is what they are. They are independent decisions. Because here is the question. If it is okay in principle for the Parliament to legislate for a decision that we disagree with when we think it gives us too much pay, Is it okay for the Parliament to legislate with a decision we disagree with that we think gives us not enough pay? Because that is the principle that's being established. That if the authority issues a determination we don't agree with, we will simply legislate over the top of it. I don't think that's a good practice. I think it is right that we set a clear criteria. It is absolutely right that at the moment the criteria are giving MPs pay rises that are out of step with every other New Zealander and therefore need to be checked and need to be addressed. But I don't think it is right that the Cabinet effectively mandates legislating over the top of an authority decision that we disagree with. I think this decision should have been taken long before that determination was even issued. For 5 years we've been talking about it. Though any time in those 5 years this issue could have been dealt with. To some extent we have no choice now but to take the course of action that we are taking because the government have dragged their heels on the matter. And so I think we should certainly give those matters some consideration, and I hope at some point there will be the opportunity for some careful reflection on this to ensure that we do actually get this right for the future. I also want to make it clear to the government that I don't see, and the Labour Party certainly doesn't see this in any way as a justification for suppressing well-deserved and well-earned pay increases to those many people working in public sector jobs, like teachers, nurses and police, all of whom are going to be making their claims to the government through collective bargaining in this year's pay rounds. It would be wrong for the government to interpret our support for this legislation as a signal that we would support simply not increasing pay for people who have gone without pay increases for many, many years while we have continued to enjoy them. That would be unfair. There are many in the public service, and when I say public service, I mean that in the widest possible sense, who have done their bit, who have tightened their belts, who have gone without any pay rises of any significance for quite some time and who frankly deserve it. And I think it's wrong for the government to try and say, well, if MPs aren't getting a pay rise, they shouldn't get one either. That's not right. That's not fair. And we're going to be monitoring that very carefully. With regard to the technical nature of the bill, we'll get into that further in the committee stage, but again I want to come back to that fundamental question of whether or not this bill is actually going to deliver on its objective, and whether in fact the calculation that's now being made is a fair one. This bill, at its essence, links MP pay rises to the quarterly employment survey for public servants. The problem with using the quarterly employment survey as a measure is that that also captures people who move into different and higher paid jobs, or who move from part-time to full-time employment, and those types of things, which actually lift potentially the salary rises higher than they might otherwise have gone. It's not comparing apples with apples. If we were to look at some kind of standard definitions of what's counted, then that might make a difference. But under the current formula, there's a real potential again that public servants, moving up the salary, not up the salary scale, but up the public service hierarchy, could therefore inflate MP salaries, and that is the very thing that we're trying to address with this bill. So there are a whole lot of technical issues in this that we simply aren't going to be able to explore in the next 3 or 4 or however many hours it takes for the Parliament to pass this bill through all stages under urgency. So to recap this first contribution and to summarise the points that I'm making, first and foremost, I don't think MPs should be getting large-scale pay rises, and I'm pleased the government are dealing with it. I think we need to be looking at an enduring solution that ensures that our pay, MPs' pay, is not a subject that we spend time debating in this House, but that is determined independently on a clear set of criteria, and I'm not yet convinced that the criteria that this bill proposes are going to be the right ones that are going to deliver the outcomes that we're after. And third, I think this process is flawed, shouldn't be being done under urgency. Although now, because the government have left it so long, we have no choice, and so the Labour Party, we feel that we're forced into the position where we have to support it. And second, and related to that, this shouldn't be a cabinet dictate. This should be based on an independent review. It should be determined independently, and this is a very bad process.